guys, it's Rogway here, and today we are looking at macro photography. And what is macro photography? Well, macro photography is the art, I call it an art, of getting as close as we can to the subjects that we're photographing. And this is one of those areas that I know when I was starting on photography, this is the area that kind of interested me the most. I wanted to see how close I could get, to things that I normally couldn't see very well with my own eyes. This is a two-part tutorial. First part, we're going to discuss equipment and how to take better macro photos. And in the second part, we're going to look at some techniques we can use to take more advanced macro photos. So first of all, let's take a look at the equipment. Now, you don't need to necessarily have the best equipment out there. This is one of those areas in photography where you probably don't need to have the most expensive gear. You can get by with stuff that's reasonably priced. And today I'm going to show you some examples of what we can do to just our standard lenses to get closer and to get better macro shots. So I've got my 7D here. I could be shooting with a Mark III, I could be shooting with a point and shoot, I can be shooting with something less like a Rebel. But we're going to use this. This is just a lens or a camera that I'm really happy with. I'm happy with the results. So most of your cameras will come with a kit lens. All right, and for the 7D, the 15 to 85, that's the standard lens that comes with that. And depending on the lens that you have, oftentimes it'll give you a macro amount on the side, and basically it's telling you is what that's telling you is how close you can get to your subject before things start to go out of focus. So on this one, 0.35 meters, which is pretty darn far away still. And the way I kind of compare this to a photograph compared to our eyes is if you were to look at your finger and you were to focus on your finger and bring it slowly closer and closer to your eye, at some point, at about this point for me, things start to go out of focus. You can only keep your focus on your finger up to a certain point, and then things start to go blurry. Your lens is the same way. Your lens will have a basically a maximum closeness point before it can't focus anymore. And the kit lens that comes with the camera, oftentimes that's going to be pretty far away. All right, it's still nice to have the capabilities of taking macros anyways. And so if I just slap this on, and today what I've got for setup here is nothing very fancy here. All I'm doing is a very simple white piece of paper up against the back of my screen, and I've got this old sort of stopwatch, pocket watch, which I kind of thought was a cool subject for macro photos. So I'm going to set that up just up against my computer like so, nothing fancy, and I'm going to show you what I see through my camera. All right, and so let's just get that going here. So as you can see here, not having a whole heck of a lot of luck because my macro on this lens sucks. It's right there. And I'm going to just show you that that's as close as I can get with this lens. I can move it over into the light here a little bit to give you a better idea, but as you can see, it's not very close. Okay? Because the close focus point of this camera is still pretty far away from my subject. If I get closer, everything gets blurry. Okay, so I got to be pretty far away before I can actually get my subject into focus. Alright, so how can we get closer than that without having to buy an expensive lens? Well, our focal length for this lens is 15 to 85. And we know that at 85 it's extended this far, which is as close as we can get. Alright, obviously I have to go further back. But if we could find a way to increase our focal length, essentially what we could do is double or even triple in some cases the closeness of our image. And what I mean by that is quite simply putting some sort of a spacer in between our kit lens and the body so that we have a greater focal length, which should allow us to get closer. Now what some people will do is they will buy kits for their particular lens, and you'll hear that they reverse their lens. So they get an attachment that goes on this side, and they actually reverse their lens so that they're looking through the lens the wrong way. And what that does is it increases focal length. It makes it get much closer. All right, and that is actually a cheap alternative to buying a new lens altogether. You get the converter, the attachment, and you can get closer that way. What I like are these. These are extender tubes. They're relatively cheap. You can go with, there's tons of different brands, and they fit your most lenses, as long as it's the standard sort of connector on the back. And the way that this works is you see on the side I've got 1, 2, and 3, and these can come apart. So I can actually unscrew the different extender tubes, or I can unscrew each one. If I don't want to get super close, I can screw off as many as I need, and then I can get to the get as close as I want. All right, so how do these work? They work just like putting on a lens. So this clicks into place, and you line up your dots on this end of the lens, just like, just like so. All right, you'll hear a click. Now what we've done is we've added that extra extension, which increases our focal length. Our lens should still be able to focus as close as it did before, but now we've got the added extension, which should allow us to get much closer. When you add your before you add your extender tubes, what you should always do is crank your aperture. So bring your aperture up to as high as it'll go. I got mine on f22, because once that connection is lost, you lose all those controls to your lens. You're no longer connected to the body, which means you won't have any you won't have any aperture adjustments. You have to go manual focus. You have no more autofocus motor engaged because of the disconnection. So what I do is I put my aperture really high, and that way when I disconnect it with the extender tubes, I know that it's already stopped down, and it's going to give me maximum depth of field.
Okay, with extender tubes on, look how close we can get. Unbelievable.
Okay, now one thing I want to mention about what happens when we get closer and closer, as you probably noticed from the sample video that I just showed you with using the extender tubes to get close to this stopwatch, is as we get closer and closer and closer to a subject, there is less available light. So if you try to imagine that all the light coming into your lens is like a cone, and from here I can get all this light that's coming from around me, as I'm getting closer and closer and closer, that cone is getting smaller and smaller. And what's happening as a result is there's less available light for the camera to take the photo. And as with all photography, the key to having really good photos is to have a lot of light, so that you have more options available to you. All right, so the solution for this is what is known as a ring light. And this is a ring light here. Now, again, we're trying to do this on the cheap. You could take desk lamps and you could position them on the sides of your subject, try to get as much light down there as possible, or you can buy one of these, and they're relatively inexpensive. This just goes into the hot shoe of your camera, and in this case we've got a dimmer, which allows us to go really bright, or we could tone it down to a less bright setting. We can also set it to just the left or the right side, okay, and we can also change it from continuous to flash. And what flash will do is it'll fire the ring light at the same time that the flash would go on the camera. That's especially useful if you're photographing things like skittish bugs and things that get scared really easily, so that the bright light is not shining on them the whole time. All right, so I'm going to leave it on continuous, and I'm going to show you the difference in the result of using a ring light versus no ring light, same subject, same shot with the extender tubes. Okay, so as you can see, the result of that is much better. You can see this thing's starting to become a real beast. I mean, we got the extenders, we got the ring light, we got the lens. It's starting to get big and bulky. And it's relatively inexpensive, like I said, to get these attachments. You're going to increase the professionalism of your macro photos by quite a bit by doing this. Let's take a look at the difference with using a really expensive, in this case we're looking at the, this is the Macro 100, alright, red ring f2.8 L lens. Really nice lens, really expensive. But let's just take a look at the quality of the shot we're going to get from an actual expensive macro lens versus what we just did with the cheap sort of setup. And let's just compare the results. So I'm going to get this one on instead. And I'm just going to click it in. Alright, and I'm just going to show you the results of using just this macro lens on its own versus what we just did.
Okay, so here we go. Well, look at that. Without any extension tubes at all, we're already pretty much as close as the other lens was with the extender tubes, and this is with no ring lights right now.
Alright, so you can see that the results from using an expensive macro lens really is impressive. However, that being said, we can still use this macro lens with our extender tubes and with our ring lights. So let's take a look at that as well.
So as you can see, we can get quite a bit closer once again, and we're able to see all those unbelievably tiny details that are very, very minuscule on the actual watch itself. Very impressive.
Now, one other thing that's worth mentioning is using a tripod when you're photographing macro shots. And the reason for that is if you've ever used a scope on a gun, you know that the closer you get to your subject, every little movement makes massive, drastic movements when you're zoomed in. I like to use these little, I think they're called monkey pods, these small tripods. They're very inexpensive and they work really, really well. They're just going to keep everything secured really, really nicely so you don't have any movement when you're doing the macro photo. Another thing I like to do is tether my camera to the computer so that I'm not putting any movement into my camera at all. It's all controlled from the camera. And depending on whether you're with Nikon or Canon, each of them have their own tethering software that comes with the cameras in most cases. It's a really great way where you don't have to worry about hitting it by accident or moving it too soon. So tethering is a good way to get really crisp and clean macro photos. Now, one last thing I want to mention before we end here is as you get closer to your subject, what you'll notice happens is you end up with a smaller and smaller and smaller depth of field. The band of your depth of field becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. And what we're going to look at in the part 2 of this series is how to increase your depth of field by taking multiple shots and getting better macro photos still from what you've gotten up to this point. So stay tuned, should be good. Thanks for watching.